Death can serve many functions in a film, from tugging at your heartstrings to leaving you pumping your fist in delight at seeing a scumbag villain finally get their well-earned comeuppance. But just because it looks like a character dies without any ambiguity whatsoever, that doesn't mean it's what the filmmakers or the studio actually had in mind. And so, following our previous video on the subject, we come to another 10 movie characters whose apparent deaths weren't quite as concrete as they first seemed. This is Whatculture, and here are movie characters you didn't realize actually survived. Damian Karras, The Exorcist. Oh look, it's another fun opportunity for me to talk about The Exorcist and its criminally underappreciated sequel, The Exorcist 3. Side note, go check out Whatculture Horror if you haven't already, as we tend to go more in depth on the genre there. Anyway, anyone who's seen the late William Friedkin's 1973 masterpiece The Exorcist will be aware that at the end of the film, Damian Karras dies, having sacrificed himself to vanquish the demon that had been possessing young Regan. Karras has his last rites read by Father Dyer and ascends to heaven, having had his faith restored. All in all, a somber but also inspirational end for the character. The Exorcist 3, written and directed by the original novelist William Peter Blatty from his own book, Legion, picks up over a decade after the events of the original film, and is, in my view, the greatest horror sequel ever made. It's also really underseen, so it wouldn't be unfair to assume that quite a few Exorcist lovers miss that Karras makes a tragic return in the movie as Patient X, now claiming to be the Gemini killer who died over a decade prior to the events of the film. Karras actor Jason Miller didn't return in Blatty's superior but now sadly patchwork Legion cut, but Karras' presence is a key fixture of both stories. For all intents and purposes, Karras did pass away in that fateful encounter with Pazuzu years prior, but his corporeal form is inhabited for sinister purposes in revenge. Through Karras, the Gemini is able to reenact his grisly crimes, posing a heart-rending adversary for the returning Lieutenant Kinderman.
Chris D'Amico, Kick-Ass 2. Now, Kick-Ass 2 was nowhere near as good as the original, that needs to be said, but it does end with Chris D'Amico, aka the motherfucker, seemingly meeting his grisly end after he falls into a water tank and is violently mauled to death by a shark. And by the time the film ended, most viewers probably would left thinking, it's not as good as the original, and probably just didn't feel like sitting through the credits and potentially waiting for a possible post-credit scene, but alas, leaving early means that they would have missed out on a little-known end stinger, revealing that Chris is in a hospital after having inexplicably survived his encounter with the shark. And that's not to say that he's alive without considerable cost though, having lost both of his legs and also his penis to the hungry shark. Though this was clearly intended to set up a third film, the apathetic audience reception and its resultingly mediocre box office performance quickly put the kibosh on those plans.
Diane, Shaun of the Dead. Shaun of the Dead's Diane, played by Lucy Davis, appears to quite obviously perish near the end of the movie, even if we never actually see her get torn apart by the zombies on screen. After her boyfriend David goes and messes everything up and then gets disemboweled by the undead horde, a hysterical Diane grabs one of his severed limbs and maniacally runs out of the Winchester pub into the crowd of zombies, hilariously professing a desire to save the very, very dead David. Given that Diane is literally surrounded by hundreds of hungry zombies, it's tough to picture any way for her to survive, especially as she's never seen again. However, the DVD release of the film included an extra which revealed, via a series of storyboards, that Diane did in fact survive the undead apocalypse. Diane explains that she used David's dismembered leg to fight her way through the crowd and then climbed into a nearby tree before passing out. After waking up, Diane snacked on David's leg for a few days and then emerged unscathed once the zombies were dealt with. And in a totally unnecessary postscript, she also reveals that she then moved to Birmingham to live with her aunt and maintains quote-unquote Christmas card contact with Shaun and Liz.
Creighton Duke, Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday. Though the 9th Friday the 13th movie, Jason Goes to Hell, is in no way a good movie, it did give the world Creighton Duke, the cowboy-esque bounty hunter hired to hunt down a resurrected Jason Voorhees. In the film itself, Duke appears to meet his maker after receiving a fatal bear hug from Jason, seemingly crushing his back. That's the last that we see of Duke in this movie, though in a 2018 podcast interview, director Adam Marcus, who also helped assemble the film's story, Evolutionary, confirmed that Duke actually survived his brutal run-in with Jason. He said, Creighton Duke didn't die. There's the answer, he did not die. The way I shot it was to give you this moment of, oh no, but honestly, he exhales. But you don't really see the light go out of his eyes. And to that end, my new production company Skeleton Crew is basically doing something to resurrect Creighton Duke as a standalone character. Though Marcus's planned Duke spin-off movie hasn't come to fruition, fans at least have the comfort of knowing that a beloved franchise character is somehow still alive and kicking.
Dr. Robert Neville, I Am Legend. Here's a wild one. I Am Legend, of course, ends with Dr. Robert Neville, Will Smith, distributing the cure to the mankind-annihilating virus before sacrificing himself, detonating a grenade to eliminate the attacking fleet of Darkseekers who threaten to destroy the cure. It's a bummer of an ending that sees the movie unexpectedly veer off into schlocky action territory, and only proved all the more infuriating when an alternate ending was released on home video, where Neville survives and instead realizes that the Darkseekers aren't simply mindless monsters. All the same, the theatrical ending was regrettably canon as far as the movie went. That was, at least, until the other year when Warner Bros. Announced that a sequel to I Am Legend was in development, with Smith inexplicably returning despite Neville apparently being blown to smithereens. And though it would have been easy to assume that Smith would simply play Neville in flashbacks or the film itself would be a prequel, nah, it's neither of those things. It's actually been revealed that the sequel will go the uncommon route of throwing out the theatrical ending and accepting the alternate one as canon. It's certainly a strange and potentially confusing decision given how the majority of people who have seen I Am Legend are likely only aware of the ending that's actually in the movie. Yet, given how the alternate ending is near universally agreed to be superior, it also makes sense in its own way.
Hannibal. Pacific Rim. Pacific Rim would be a lot less fun without its colourful cast of wacky cartoonish characters, including among them Hannibal, who's played by Ron Perlman, a black market dealer of kaiju organs. Given his brash persona and ridiculous attire, including a pair of prized gold-plated shoes, it was just a matter of time before Hannibal got chowed down on by a kaiju, and indeed, late in the movie he's swallowed whole by an infant kaiju in a great comic relief moment. The rest of the movie plays out with Hannibal believed to be dead, despite the kaiju which ate him itself dying moments later. Yet those few who bothered to stick around through the first batch of CGI end credits would actually learn of his true fate. In the mid-credits scene, a very much alive, goo-covered Hannibal can be seen cutting his way out of a dead kaiju, where he seems much more bothered about one of his missing shoes than the fact that he was almost eaten alive. Annoyingly though, he didn't return for the sequel Pacific Rim Uprising, allegedly due to scheduling conflicts, but still, he's alive and out there somewhere.
Davy Jones, Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Men Tell No Tales. Death, admittedly, has hilariously little meaning in the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, but at least Davy Jones, Bill Nye, is an awesome enough antagonist that it's tough to blame the filmmakers too much for wanting to resurrect him. Jones dies in the third film at World's End when Orlando Bloom's Will and Johnny Depp's Jack stab him in the heart, sending him to a watery grave. This fate stuck for a decade until the fifth film, Dead Men Tell No Tales, saw Jones reappear in the bedroom of Will and Elizabeth's in a post-credits scene. Though at first it appears that Will simply had a nightmare of Davy, the final shot shows his wet, nasty barnacles on the bedroom floor, confirming he was in fact really there. Quite how old Davy is alive again is anyone's guess, but given the series' loosey-goosey approach to logic in general, and especially mortality, it's presumably something that would have been explained with a supernatural ass pull in the sixth film, which is unlikely to happen, but you know.
Moriarty, young Sherlock Holmes. 1985's ludicrously underseen cult classic Young Sherlock Holmes offers up an early post-credits stinger more than 20 years before the Marvel Cinematic Universe made it an expected staple of glossy tentpole movies. The film ends with a surprise reveal that the villainous cult leader, Tar, is actually in fact Sherlock's friend and fencing teacher, Professor Wraith. In the climactic fistfight, Holmes gets the better of his former teacher, who falls through the ice into the freezing River Thames below, seemingly drowning in the process. But at the end of the closing credits, a mysterious man can be seen checking into an inn while signing himself in at the desk as Holmes' all-time arch-nemesis, Moriarty. We then cut to Moriarty, who is revealed to be, inexplicably alive, Wraith all along. Though most turned the movie off long before this scene played out, it's absolutely vital considering how fundamentally it reframes the entire story.
Norman Nordstrom, Don't Breathe 2. Don't Breathe 2 is a messy, deeply weird sequel, but the film at least seemed to tie itself off and deny the prospect of any other sequels when Norman Nordstrom, aka the blind man played by Stephen Lang, perishes at the end. Quite rightly, many question the film's decision to reinvent Norman as an anti-hero, given that the first film revealed him to be a thoroughly not nice person. But in the very least, he does die a sacrificial death at the end of Don't Breathe 2, laying down his life to save his adopted daughter Tara, played by Madeline Grace. Unambiguously ending the series after 2 movies unequivocally seemed like the right call, but because old Hollywood just can't help itself, a post-credit scene shows villain Raylan's dog licking Norman's fingers, which then twitch, confirming him to be alive somehow. He's still breathing, so the title of Don't Breathe, it's kind of inaccurate at this point. While the critical and commercial reception to the sequel likely prevent a third film from ever happening, it did still turn a modest profit, so never say never, I guess.
George Harrison, Yesterday. Danny Boyle's rom-com Yesterday revolves around a struggling musician, Jack, who after being hit by a bus during a global blackout wakes up to discover that the rest of the world hasn't heard of the Beatles. The film's big third act twist is the reveal that John Lennon is actually still alive, having lived to an old age due to not becoming famous and subsequently not being murdered. This is all well and good, but also implies a brighter future for another character, albeit an unseen one whose existence is nevertheless implied. This is the other departed member of the Beatles, George Harrison, who died in 2001 at the age of 58 from lung cancer. Within the film's reality, it's not just the Beatles who have been wiped from existence. Everyday objects have also disappeared, such as Coca-Cola and even cigarettes. So, given that Harrison himself cited cigarettes as the likely cause for his own throat cancer diagnosis in 1997, which his family believe led him to developing lung cancer a few years later, it's probable that the removal of cigarettes from this timeline would have saved Harrison's life. And I know that it's not a sure thing, of course, but given that Harrison also received lung damage from a 1999 stabbing by a mentally ill fan, which is generally accepted to have exacerbated his lung cancer, it's again highly likely that, without being a member of the Beatles, he'd be alive and well into old age today.
Dr. Olivia Octavius, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. One of the big pleasant surprises of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was the gender-flipped version of Doc Ock, Olivia Octavius, voiced with sure relish by the great Catherine Hahn. Disappointing it was then that Liv was on the receiving end of a fairly gnarly death during the film's chaotic climax, being hit by an errant 18-wheeler truck when the super collider goes all kablooey. Now, getting hit by a massive truck is almost certainly fatal, and the fact we don't see Liv again seems to confirm that. However, this was later confirmed not to be the case. A deleted segment from the sequence shows Liv waking up after being creamed by the truck, and just as the dimensional portal is about to collapse, jumping into it, therefore transporting her into parts unknown. While deleted scenes aren't always strictly canon, and Doc Ock was notably completely absent from the recent sequel, Into the Spider-Verse co-director Rodney Rothman did state in a 2019 interview that she was, quote, not gone from the story. A man can only dream.
Deadpool, X-Men Origins Wolverine. Well, here's a character that just about nobody actually wanted to survive, but damn it, they did anyway. X-Men Origins Wolverine was rightly dragged by fans for numerous reasons, not least the fact that it reworked fan favorite superhero Deadpool into a generic, genetically enhanced super soldier who possessed a grab bag of X-Men abilities while also looking nothing like the actual Deadpool and unforgivably had his damn mouth sewn shut. Mercifully at least, Deadpool, or as fans came to call him, Baraka-Pool, given his resemblance to Mortal Kombat's Baraka, appeared to die at the film's end, with Wolverine using his claws to part the mutant's head from his body. But for anyone masochistic enough to sit through the end credits, it was revealed that the totally not Deadpool survived his decapitation, as his hands are shown picking up his own head. Thankfully though, this outcome was well and truly jettisoned from the continuity in Deadpool 2, where the Merc with a mouth travels back in time and shoots Baraka-Pool dead once more, and hopefully forevermore. Phew.
Tom Hanson and Doug Penhall, 21 Jump Street. The big screen 21 Jump Street reboot was a pleasant surprise for many reasons, not least that it featured a pair of unexpected cameos from the original TV show stars, Johnny Depp and Peter DeLuise, playing their undercover cop characters Hanson and Penhall. The duo are both shot multiple times during the movie's climactic shootout, with the very clear implication being that they died, quite neatly passing the torch to Jonah Hill and Channing Tatum's new generation of youthful undercover cops. But directors Phil Lord and Chris Miller did actually shoot an extra scene that confirms Hanson and Penhall survived. Despite being shot full of holes, the scene shows the wounded duo regaining consciousness and affirming that, actually, they're gonna be okay. Their survival wasn't mentioned in sequel 22 Jump Street, and with a third film never really going into production, there's virtually zero chance this will ever be followed up on.
Marshmallow, Frozen. In Frozen, Marshmallow is the name of Elsa's enchanted snow monster that she creates to serve as her palace guard. At the end of the film, Marshmallow faces off against Prince Hans and his army, and while attempting to keep Elsa safe, ends up falling down a gorge to his presumed demise. It's a classically family-friendly Disney character death. Fall from a great height in a way where you're presumed dead, but younger viewers will never have to see your gnarly remains. In this case, though, Marshmallow incredulously manages to survive his tumble, and in the film's post-credits scene, he's shown limping back to the castle in surprisingly good shape for a relatively fragile creature that just fell hundreds of feet to the ground. Good going, mate.
Bison, Street Fighter. Now, nobody could be blamed for turning 1994's Street Fighter off the moment that the end credits roll, because outside of Raul Julia's riotous performance as villain Bison, what else is there to enjoy, really? At the end of the movie, Bison is given a seemingly pretty damn decisive death when JCVD's Guile spin kicks him into his own wall of monitors, which consequently go up in a gigantic fireball. And that's the end of that, except for those precious few who actually bothered to sit through the credits, who were rewarded with a post-credits stinger, as Bison's hand punches a hole through the wreckage of his destroyed base, rather lazily setting up a sequel. Said sequel never materialized despite the film's box office success, but given that Julia sadly passed away before the original was even released, it's probably just as well.
Skeletor, Masters of the Universe. Oh my god, this has to be the film's only high point. Seriously, I love Masters of the Universe, but this film is so bad. The end scene though, where Skeletor emerges out of the water and just says, "I'll be back," is absolutely side-splittingly hilarious. But most people didn't actually watch that far because they kind of turned it off halfway through because the rest of it's not that great. And you know what the weird thing is though, is that even despite saying, "I'll be back," you know how he says it, he actually didn't come back. But at least we'll always have that heartwarming role made all the better by learning that the actor only did it for the sake of his 4-year-old son, and still considers it to be part of his all-time favourite roles. What a ledge.
The High Evolutionary, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. On an initial viewing of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, most understandably assumed that the villainous High Evolutionary was killed when his ship exploded during the climax, given that he's seemingly not seen in the movie ever again. However, following the film's release, writer and director James Gunn revealed that eagle-eyed fans could actually see Drax carrying an unconscious High Evolutionary off the ship shortly before it explodes. And more to the point, Gunn shot a deleted scene that more blatantly confirms his survival, with him being imprisoned on Nowhere by Rocket Raccoon in a rather fitting turnaround given his penchant for imprisoning and torturing Zurg, Lightyear. Lightyear takes plenty of liberties with the existing Buzz Lightyear lore within Toy Story itself, such as revealing that this version of villain Zurg is in fact an older version of Buzz from the original timeline. It was a divisive twist for those people that are really into Toy Story lore, and at the film's end, Zurg is seemingly obliterated when the prime Buzz, Chris Evans, shoots the fuel he's holding, triggering a massive, presumably fatal explosion. But Disney being Disney, one of the film's post-credit scenes cuts back to the expanse of space, where Zurg is drifting aimlessly as his eyes glow red, confirming his survival.